I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear
I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
Welcome back, everybody. It's the President's Guy, back with another reaction video. Full disclosure, I have seen this video about 3 hours ago when I tried to record this the first time, and didn't realize until I was finished that I never actually hit record. So I might be a little more pissy than usual in this recording and have a little less tolerance for the insane statements that you're going to hear. This is from the Michael Knowles show, and this is the only video I've ever seen from him, but having seen it, I can tell you to say it is a partisan hack would be generous. He's not even like Ben Shapiro, where at least when he says something that is demonstrably not true, he at least makes it sound historically accurate. This guy just takes a comedic, ball-busting approach to these presidential rankings, which is what this video is. So let's just get this over with again.
With a foggy-headed marionette in the Oval Office, I figured now would...
This is also from May of 2021, well before Biden's cognitive issues were very obvious. He was still pretty much himself back then.
Be a better time than just about ever to give out a definitive ranking of the presidents. Other people, they'll say this is S tier and this is F tier. We have different categories. For the top tier, the S tier, we have King Arthur, the ideal leader. At the next level, right below that, where you can really show, you got some Gullions.
Oh, the language on you.
You're really tough. Maybe you're not quite the top, but you're pretty good. King Leonidas. In the third tier...
I have to say, I do like this approach to the rankings. It's much more historically relevant, and especially with some of his other choices, it's pretty fun.
Kind of middle of the road, some good stuff, but a little bit weak. You've got King Mufasa. The level below that, now things are getting pretty bad. You have King Lear. And then at the lowest tier, we of course have the Burger King level of Commander-in-Chief. Those are the 5 categories: Arthur, Leonidas, Mufasa, Lear, and Burger. Before we begin, this video is sponsored by Ring. No matter your home, Ring has everything you need to protect it. More from them in a minute. Now, let's get started. I'm going to try to get through at least half of the presidents and give them the definitive ranking. Let's begin with...
Real definitive ranking when you're not even doing them all.
Numero uno, George Washington. George Washington, first president of the United States, no question whatsoever, he is King Arthur. He may actually be the reincarnation of King Arthur. The indispensable man, loved lots of the founding fathers. He was the best among them. Without George Washington, there would not be a United States of America, I'm pretty confident to say. So he's the one, he gets the top spot, no surprise there. Next up.
Not
John
really
Adams,
major argument.
the second president of the United States. He was less commanding, perhaps, than George Washington, but he was still really, really great. I'm going to give him Leonidas. Okay, he's right below that top tier. Like Leonidas, he lost, right? So he won one term, but then he lost to Thomas Jefferson in the election of 1800. The other thing I really like...
He lost in the House, and for me, Adams is a much better founding father than president. He's C tier at best. The Alien and Sedition Acts alone bring him down.
About John Adams, other than he was a conservative and a real conservative.
He was a Federalist.
He defended the British soldiers in the Boston Massacre because he felt that they were in the right, and
he didn't feel they were in the right. He just acknowledged their right to legal counsel.
That the way the press had been covering this was not fair. But then, of course, he was one of the great patriots in the Revolution. So really fair-minded, very conservative. He had an acid tongue. He once said of Alexander Hamilton, who was a member of Adams's own party, that he was the bastard bat of a Scotch peddler, and there were not enough whores in Philadelphia to contain his superabundance of secretions. So that's pretty terrific.
Bastard brat, not bastard bat. And yeah, him and Hamilton did not get along. Hamilton didn't really get along with most of the founders outside of Washington.
Thick diction. He'll get that Leonidas level. Next up, Thomas Jefferson, the man who beat John Adams. I'm going to give Jefferson, he gets Leonidas too. He's not quite King Arthur because some of his ideas were a little kooky, but this is also the reason why Jefferson gets such a high ranking, is he talked like a big lib. If you read a lot of what Jefferson wrote, he really sounded kind of like a lib. However,
it's hard to take people seriously when they talk like this, like a lib, and then they want to accuse the other side of being divisive and partisan. Jefferson was the basis for the modern Democratic Party. The Jeffersonian Democrats that come out of the Jacksonian Democrats that use Jefferson as a basis. He's a Democratic Republican, but he's an anti-federalist. He's a small government guy. He certainly does, overstep his constitutional bounds in the Louisiana Purchase. He goes against his own principles in establishing West Point because he didn't believe in a standing army. But outside of his Embargo Act in 1807, he's generally considered one of our better presidents. But his reasons for it are just absolutely insane.
Behaved in many ways like a conservative. He expanded the United States. He was a great defender of liberal education. Liberal in the good sense of that word, even though he kind of weakened it a little bit, founded the University of Virginia. All around, really, really impressive guy. So, okay, he's up there with Leonidas. Andrew Jackson, 7th President of the United States. Everyone wants me to say Burger King level. Or at the very best, he's a Mufasa type. Or a King Lear. No. Andrew Jackson also gets Leonidas level. I know, they're going to call me a racist or a sexist or a thisist or a thatist. Oh, Andrew Jackson, he was mean to the Indians or something, which frankly was actually his successor who was far meaner to the Indians.
Van Buren merely carries out the Indian Removal Act that Jackson signs and starts. So he's completely complicit in that. He also vetoes the charter renewal for the Bank of America, which puts the United States into an economic panic, which leads to Van Buren not getting reelected. Jackson was definitely a racist, very much in line with the times, and he was definitely not a sexist, though. If you look at the way he tried to defend his wife from kind of the gossipy circles of Washington, definitely not a sexist.
But let's not forget, Andrew Jackson fought wars. He was a war hero, not just against the Indians, but against the British. He was the hero of New Orleans. When it comes to the Indian Wars, by the way, for the people who want to say that he was a big racist or something like that, he actually adopted an Indian child who had been orphaned. So I don't think he harbored any kind of personal bigotry. He was a man of and for the people, demonstrated great courage. He was also against the kind of bureaucratized government, the professional administrative class. He was really against that. Had a little bit of populism. I think this is why Trump liked Jackson.
No, I don't know if Jackson adopted an Indian child or not. Even if he does, that doesn't make you immune from being racist. That's I slept with a black person, so I'm not racist argument. That's absolute nonsense. And if we're ranking him as a president, his standing as a general has nothing to do with that. And he was sort of the original national, war hero like Grant or Eisenhower or Washington before him. And he was a big fighter. He was fighting pirates in Florida, fighting in the War of 1812. He did fight the Indians. So he was a big national figure in that sense, which is what spearheads him to the presidency. But that has nothing to do with him as president.
And so much. So I don't care. He founded the Democrat Party. Okay, whatever, that's fine. He still gets Leonidas tier for me. He pursued necessary national policies and had the courage to do it. Next up, William Henry Harrison. Most people don't think about that name. Harrison was the shortest presidency that we've ever had. Harrison was president for exactly 1 month. So he can't be King Arthur. He didn't make it that long. He can't be Leonidas, really. But I'll give him, should I give him Leonidas too? No, that's a little too much. I'll give him Mufasa. He's that kind of Mufasa tier. The reason I really like him, though, is, first of all, he's the hero of Tippecanoe. He was a good, strong American military leader. And he didn't like that he was being insulted on the campaign trail. He didn't like that people were saying he'd lost a step or two. So for his inauguration, he went out it was a rainy, cold day, and he gave a 2-hour-long speech.
All around me are familiar faces.
And they had already trimmed it down. He gave a 2-hour-long speech in the cold and in the rain. He then attended multiple inauguration parties, and he just went out. He really did it up, and then he took sick and he died shortly thereafter. But you got to give him credit for the gumption. A lot of courage, so good on him. Next up, Abraham Lincoln.
These are just troll picks at this point. You can't rank Harrison. He didn't do anything. Now you're just taking the piss out of this whole exercise. So, take nothing this man says seriously.
16th president of the United States. He is
the GOAT.
The only president, I think, who could vie with Washington for that King Arthur level, because his mind was so capacious. He was such a symbol of the American dream, the American idea. A guy rose up from nothing, very serious, had studied Shakespeare and the King James Bible. That was what made up the bulk of his education. He did
exaggerating a bit
toward nobility throughout his entire life, and where he fell short, he at least was always trying. He was really striving for self-improvement, held the country together, and in that sense, refounded the nation after the Civil War. So he gets up there with King Arthur.
I feel like modern conservatives like to hold Lincoln up because he's the first Republican as sort of their trophy to say, look what we have. But if Lincoln were around today trying to institute a lot of the policies that he did then, they'd probably be against it, even though they're in favor when Trump tries to do it, like suspending habeas corpus. Lincoln was a big expander of the government, something that I would imagine this guy is not in favor of. But because it would just be incredibly stupid and unpopular to say that Lincoln wasn't one of the best presidents, they just kind of go through the motions and do it. I'm not saying he doesn't really believe that, but he's not dispensing his principles evenly, if they're even really his principles.
Next up, James Garfield, 20th president of the United States.
Another president you can't really rank. He was president for like 7 months. Half of that was in a bed dying.
He died. I think he was assassinated. I could be wrong about that. He might have just taken sick and died. But anyway, that's not why I'm interested.
He got sick and died after being assassinated.
Garfield, I guess, would get a Mufasa level. He wasn't super duper impressive, except that he published the first blank book in American history.
The Magnificent.
This was called The Political Achievements and Statesmanship of General Hancock, regular Democratic nominee for president. It was 5 blank pages. The first blank book in American history was Republicans trolling Democrats in the 1880 presidential.
And Republicans in 1880 having very little in common with modern Republicans, other than at least on paper with modern Republicans, fiscal responsibility, current bill being floated through Congress notwithstanding. That's pretty much all they had in common.
Election. For that alone, he has to at least rank, in that middle tier, if not a little bit higher. Next up, the vice president to James Garfield, who became president upon his death, who published the second blank book in American history in the next presidential election. That would be Chester A. Arthur, a highly, highly underrated president. Chester Arthur
I would agree with that.
A very strong record. He was good on matters of civil rights. He was a relatively modest president. He was relatively humble. Republicans right now, by the way, can learn something from Chester Arthur in the way that he handled the immigration question. Because, Republicans have this thing where we want to have national borders. We want to control who gets to come into the country. We want there to be national unity. Of course, every country wants to do that. But in the United States, if you say that you want to enforce very basic laws of immigration, you're called a racist. That's racist! And Chester Arthur, there was a big immigration law that came up during his presidency in 1882, and he vetoed the first version of the bill because he felt that it would have been punitive and violated some treaties. And so he sent it back, and then there was another bill that came to his desk, which was, a little bit more moderate in its immigration policies, and he signed that one into law. So you can be tough on it without, falling into bigotry or racism or something like that. It was moderate.
So he's basically saying, don't do what Trump did.
That moderation is a virtue, but it was strong in the sense that it did enforce national borders and assimilate new immigrants who would come in and maintain that national unity. Great stuff, Chester Arthur. He doesn't.
Also dismantles the spoils system in more of a merit-based system of government hiring.
He does not get enough credit. People forget about him, but he really did a good job. Took over after Garfield. So I guess I'll put him at Mufasa level 2. Some interesting reforms under him. Next
These
up,
rankings
Grover
make no
Cleveland.
sense.
I'm not saying I love Grover Cleveland. He was a big Dem, but he has the distinction.
Again, a Dem in the sense of like the 1890s, which is not the same as a Dem today, or even a Dem in the 1950s.
Of being the 22nd and the 24th president. He's the only president who won non-consecutive terms, so good on him for that. You got to give him some credit. He's at least a Mufasa. I think no, we'll give him a Mufasa. You want to give him that Leonidas.
I'm not even talking about what he did as president. It's like, oh, well, you got elected twice non-consecutively. Good job.
And then we get to very possibly the worst president in the history of the United States, Woodrow Wilson.
From a character standpoint, yes. From a performance standpoint,
28th president. Woodrow Wilson only became president, by the way, because Teddy Roosevelt wanted to come back into power, so he split the conservatives who would have been voting for his successor, Taft, and that by splitting the right gave Woodrow Wilson a way to enter the White House and destroy.
He didn't split the right. Republicans in the 19-teens were much more liberal. You know, Teddy and then Taft later on were all about environmental conservatism and trust busting. Not very right-leaning principles. They were just Republicans.
Destroy our country. Wilson is the most consciously progressive president in American history.
Again, progressive in the sense of modernizing and progressive in the sense of the early 20th century, not progressive in the way that we would use that term now over 100 years later.
He said,
but the right hates Wilson for being progressive and big government. The left hate him for being racist, so there's nobody left to love him. And then lately, he's been just plummeting down presidential rankings from historians.
That the old constitutional government is outdated. It's based on the laws of Isaac Newton and a fixed universe and permanent human nature. So you got to ditch all that. We're living in the age of Darwin, baby. Everything's evolving.
We're using the power of rock and roll to change the world. Woo!
We need to let government bureaucrats just run the whole country absent any accountability to the people. He just ruined everything.
That's all true.
Everyone always goes after Wilson for being a racist. Like, sure, that's bad, you know, but when you consider the list of the horrible things this guy did, I don't even know if it's on the first 3 pages. That's how bad his presidency was. He's going to be King Lear. The reason he's not all the way down at Burger King is because he really did die kind of mad and furious and ripping his hair out. Because finally, after he had almost thoroughly destroyed the country, the Senate refused to go along with his stupid at that time, the League of Nations plan, so they wouldn't sign on to it, and he was really upset by that, and he died from the stress.
He had a stroke in the middle of his second term, and he died 3 or 4 years later.
So, you know, kind of like Lear, he's just screaming and yelling, "Blow, wind, crack your cheeks." Next up, Warren Harding.
Terrible.
Oh, Warren Harding, you know, that guy's at least a Mufasa. He is. Everyone thinks he's a Burger King. Everyone says, oh, Harding, he's one of the worst presidents.
His literal quote was, "I'm not qualified to be here and I never should have been." And he knew it.
Presidents in American history. Very, very underrated president. When he died in office, he was one of the most popular presidents in the history of the country. He was really...
And Harry Truman, one of our better presidents, was very unpopular when he left. The popularity, in your opinion, with the people, you know, it means a lot in terms of getting elected, but it doesn't mean a lot in terms of judging your job performance necessarily.
He's strong on various matters, you know. He, like, how do I put this? I sound like I'm Donald Trump. He was really strong on the thing, you know, the thing. They always try to hit him on Teapot Dome. This was this scandal for
the big corruption scandal.
You know, it was some moderate sort of corruption. That was just a way to distract from. He had a very good record. He was very popular. He was serving the interests of the people. He was a modest reformer. I give him Mufasa. Next up, Calvin Coolidge, Silent Cal, last of his breed. Gotta love Silent Cal. I would put him at a Leonidas level. The reason.
No disagreement. Coolidge is very much a believer in the executive being just administrative, you know, not an active campaigning position for legislation. Was the hero for Ronald Reagan, although they really couldn't have been much, you know, couldn't have been more different. But Cal could have run for another term, but didn't think that it was right to exceed the 8 years that Washington served. So he chose to leave after what would have been about 6 years.
The reason I put him at a Leonidas level is he was so deferential to the American tradition. He was so reverent toward George Washington. He was so modest in his own personal comportment. He really stood firm with this changing tide where you were going to get more and more of a sort of aggressive celebrity presidency. He stood firm against that. Silent Cal. He was good. Only president to ever shrink the government. Next up.
That's not true. Clinton shrank the government. Grant shrank the government. Plenty of people have shrank the government.
Franklin Roosevelt, 32nd president of the United States. This one kills me because on the one hand, he's the most effective president we've ever had. He was a king. He made himself a king, whereas someone like Calvin Coolidge would rather leave office than stay in office longer than George Washington. Roosevelt, he wanted to stay there 4 terms. He would have stayed there longer had he not died. Roosevelt just utterly upending the country, implementing the sort of government that Woodrow Wilson had designed. So he was ruthlessly effective, but it was all bad. So should he rank really high up on the list or really low? I'm going to put him really low. He is the Burger King. Not
losing any and all semblance of objectivity. This is that same bullshit that Ben Shapiro likes to spew because he was, big government programs when we were in the middle of the greatest economic depression literally in American history. I mean, just absolute stupidity. Was the New Deal perfect? Absolutely not. But was the TVA great? Yes. Was Social Security great? Yes. Public Works? Yes. Getting people to work, building infrastructure, putting money in people's pockets, and his leadership in World War II, the internment camps notwithstanding, was phenomenal. So to put him anything below an A is just disingenuous, stupid, and partisan.
Because he was a joke, not because he was incompetent. Burger King is a very successful company. But because he was no King Arthur, let's put it that way. No King Arthur in his castle. A man is the king of his own castle, and if you want to keep your castle secure, you got to check out Ring. Knowles. Next up, Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was a Republican. He was a war hero, but he was kind of a lib.
Let's get busy.
So being a war hero while not president elevates you with Jackson, but it doesn't elevate you with Eisenhower.
This is the problem. This is really tough. So I guess I'd give him Mufasa level. Maybe.
Building the highway system and being so popular you could have won a 3rd term. Because popularity meant something with Harding, but it doesn't with Eisenhower, who is generally considered in the top 10 of the presidents. That's why he's on the wall right here. But, what do I know? He's a lib.
Maybe his heart was in the right place. Maybe he was trying to do good stuff. But he ultimately was not particularly successful. He, in many ways, accelerated the liberalization of America. This is why William F.
Yeah, how dare he integrate public schools?
Buckley Jr., when he founded the sort of post-war conservative movement, he was pretty cool to Ike. They wanted a more conservative candidate. Eisenhower much more from the liberal wing of the party. On the flip side of that, you have John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy was from the more conservative wing, anti-communist wing of the Democratic Party. Now, I'm not one of these people that idolizes Kennedy. He is fine. He wasn't president for very long.
I like your funny words, Magic Man.
I would probably rank him, though, at a Leonidas level. The reason I would put him at Leonidas is, he was a lib, and in his personal life, he was a bit of a degenerate.
So is Trump. It's as degenerate as they come. Half the presidents were adulterers.
But he was a staunch anti-communist. He loved Joseph McCarthy. Actually, John F. Kennedy's brother, Robert Kennedy, went to Joe McCarthy's funeral. That's how much the Kennedys loved McCarthy. He was the most toughest anti-communist crusader we had. So I'll give him Leonidas for that. And then, unfortunately, the communists took him out. Next up is LBJ. LBJ, also, he's another one like FDR. LBJ, 36th president, pushed through the Great Society, radically upended our culture and our political system. And really,
the culture was being upended by the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. LBJ just decided, let me go against my own Southern principles and actually push through some civil rights reform, some voting reform that President Kennedy wanted. And the Great Society gets a lot of flack, but Medicare and Medicaid, these are good things. Civil Service Corps, these are good things. The vast majority of the Great Society was pretty good. Did it exacerbate the welfare state? Sure. But is that incredibly overblown? Yes. LBJ, top 10 president, all day long, also on the wall.
in a way, he sort of refounded the country in terms of the legal and political upheavals during his reign. So very, very effective, great at amassing power. If you read the biography of LBJ by Robert Caro,
which is phenomenal. It's a 4-parter, working on the 5th. Excluding single volume biographies, probably the most comprehensive reading of a person's life you can do.
You see that this guy is as dishonest as they come. This guy was stealing elections back in college. He stole an election for his little staff club when he was working on the Hill. He certainly stole that 1948 Senate election in
Definitely some shady stuff involved in the 48 Senate election.
Texas, which is how he then became senator, vice president, and then president after Kennedy died. So the effect of LBJ, pretty weak stuff. I would put him at the Lear level, because also by the time he ran for re-election, he wanted to run for re-election, he couldn't. The popularity was not there. Next up, Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon is a tragic case because in many ways he was a terrific president. He was one of the great political figures of his age.
Nixon always wins.
He was basically the only person who believed Whittaker Chambers when Whittaker Chambers said that there are commies in the government, up to and including Alger Hiss, who helped found the UN at the State Department. Guys,
Alger Hiss was not a communist, and were there communists in the government? Probably. Was it as big as the Red Scare would lead you to believe? Absolutely not. But Nixon was also a big anti-communist.
Like Harry Dexter White at Treasury. Everyone said, oh, you're crazy, this is conspiratorial. No way, all the libs tried to downplay it. But no, there were commies throughout the U.S. government who were taking direct orders from Moscow and who were serving as Soviet spies. So Nixon knew it, he caught it, they never forgave him for it. They never forgave him for taking down Alger Hiss. That's why there were so many shenanigans in 1960, and that's why the deep state stole the election from him, or rather stole the presidency from him after he won re-election later on. However,
they didn't steal the presidency from him. He committed a crime, he lied about it, he hid it, it came out, and he resigned, rightfully so. The 1960 election was not stolen. Kennedy won. You can't make the argument that the deep state was stealing elections. If they were going to do that, they would have just stopped you from winning in the first place. These conspiracy theories don't make any damn sense at all.
Nixon let his paranoia run away with him. He made some crucial political mistakes, and he went down because of it. I'm not saying it was fair, but he probably went down a little bit like King Lear. Too bad, because if not for that, I'm torn. He's either a King Lear or a Leonidas. He's a
C-tier president.
It just depends on kind of what part of his career you're going to focus on. So you know what? Because I want to take a more positive view of Nixon, I'll give him the Leonidas thing. But he did go down, so in some ways.
Better than Eisenhower? No effing way.
It's kind of like King Lear. Make of that what you will. Jimmy Carter. Burger King. Done. That's it.
The disrespect. One of our more underrated presidents. People just look at the Panama Canal without understanding the political atmosphere at the time and just think, oh, terrible president. How dare he want solar panels and diplomacy. Very underrated president. Deserves more respect. Phenomenal human being.
Ronald Reagan. Reagan, 40th president of the United States. Really terrific. He's a Leonidas. He's not quite a King Arthur.
He's not a Leonidas. He vetoes an apartheid bill, ignores the AIDS crisis, blows the deficit out of the water, listens to his wife's, what's the word? Listens to his wife's fortune teller for advice, and completely complicit in a variety of scandals. People just liked him because he was funny, and he was in movies, and they felt familiar with him, and they remember him being the president during the 80s, which was a great time of technological advance, of cultural, movies and music was on fire. The economy was recovering from the issues of the 1970s, and he just gets credit for it. But he was, outside of his foreign policy, which was great, he does basically end the Cold War. His domestic policy is just abhorrent. He's a C president at best.
I love Reagan. He's not quite a King Arthur, but he was great. He understood what was going on. He stood firm. He won the Cold War. He had a clear view of the world. His legacy has been tarnished by a bunch of squishes who pretend to speak for him, and they call themselves Reaganites, but they're not really. Reagan was a lot tougher.
Romney is perhaps the most quintessential conservative in the truest sense without being alarmist and a radical that you can have. People who call Mitt Romney a rhino are rhinos.
Tougher than people give him credit for. Next up, George H.W. Bush.
Another textbook conservative.
He's Mufasa, I guess. I'm being generous, I think, to George H.W. Bush. You know, he was an admirable guy. He lived an admirable life. He was from the liberal wing of the Republican Party, but...
By the time he becomes president, maybe, but he started off on the conservative end. He just kind of went where it seemed advantageous to go, like a lot of politicians, but a great war hero and a fantastic human being, and probably presented himself nerdier than he really was, but a good man.
Upright guy who just, at the end of the Cold War, when he could have been really tough, when he could have really focused on the challenges that we had, he basically embraced a kind of liberal internationalism. So the Cold War had roiled the United States for the latter part of the 20th century. We win it. Reagan wins it. The Berlin Wall comes down. And George H.W. Bush, instead of focusing on the cultural new Cold War that was going on in the United States, he decided to look abroad. And famously, you saw this when in the 1992 Republican nominating convention, there were two candidates. Pat Buchanan, who was the social conservative, and George H.W. Bush, who was the liberal Republican. And in the speeches, Buchanan gave the famous culture war speech, which I talk about in my book, Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds. And George H.W. Bush talked about how the real fight now is to just make a lot of money. And we need to control the markets around the world. So we made some more money and we lost the whole culture. It's too bad. Bill?
We didn't lose all the culture. You know, the Cold War officially ends in 91, you know, when the Soviet Union topples and he's kicked out of office in 92. What was he supposed to do? But also, this is one of those kind of people that will praise people for being isolationists like Trump, but then get mad at H.W. Bush for not going across the world and trying to rebuild Eastern Europe into his own vision. We can't be both the world's police and leave it alone at the same time. You have to make up your mind. And that's why people like this with no actual principles who just say the thing that they think will make the base happy just have no legitimacy behind them.
Bill Clinton was basically just a continuation of George H.W. Bush. They were both
kind of
liberal centrist internationalists. There's not much of a difference between them.
That's true.
I guess Clinton was more of a degenerate in his personal life.
Yeah.
And had creative uses for cigars and things like that.
I did not have sexual relations.
Did balance the budget.
But, you know, I put him, I don't know, what's he?
Did cut a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse out of the government.
I mean, no, he's a Burger King. He's a clown, right? Bill Clinton's just a clown.
Just because he's a Democrat. Again, no objectivity. I would put him and Bush in the same category.
And won't really be remembered for much of anything. Because he didn't even ask, what did he stand for? He stood for his own pleasure, basically. George W. Bush, poor guy. He actually, I do think, had some beliefs, but he just was not very effective, and he got
not a good communicator
by a lot of people, and so he was upright in his personal comportment, but in terms of the efficacy of his presidency, it was pretty weak stuff. He's a Mufasa. Barack Obama.
No.
Obama was effective. He really was effective, and.
No, he wasn't.
So,
Obama gets the Recovery Act and the Affordable Care Act through before the 2010 midterms, and then doesn't really get much else done after that because he saddled with the Republican Congress for 6 years. He couldn't get gun legislation passed after children were executed, so I wouldn't call that effectiveness. I'm not criticizing Obama, but just I wouldn't say he was effective in the way that FDR, LBJ, or even Biden were effective in actually getting things done.
In that sense, you know, in a way, you want to give him credit for being a big tough guy, but because of how bad the effect of his policies were in the country, you got to make him Burger King.
No.
Then we get to Donald Trump, the best president of my lifetime. I haven't been around very long.
I'm sure he was alive during Reagan, and any actual conservative who puts Reagan below Trump, again, is just full of shit.
But
also, after this second term, and we're only 120 days into it, I would have put Trump in a D. You know, but after January 6th and everything he's been doing since January of this year, worst president of all time.
I'd call him a Leonidas. He's not. No. He's not a.
Jesus Christ, no.
He's got some personal issues. He would be the first one to tell you that.
He's nothing but personal
but
issues.
He did fight really hard. He fought for a good cause, and he lost. Like Leonidas, he was ultimately
white supremacy.
unsuccessful. But he put up a good fight. I think he inspired a lot of people. I hope that like Leonidas loses at the Battle of Thermopylae, but the Greeks win the war about a year later. Hopefully, Trump, they went after him. He fended them off, repeatedly. But then, in the end, ultimately, they finally got him. But hopefully he can inspire the rest of us conservatives to win the longer war. Then finally, Joe Biden. Joe Biden, is there another tier? Can I have a tier? I don't even want to give him credit for being Burger King. I think that the Burger King stands for much more than Joe Biden does. And I think the Burger King is in much greater control of his corporation than Joe Biden is in control of the country.
Come on, man.
So he's some lower tier. He's some lesser fast food restaurant. So what could be below Burger King? I guess Joe Biden, he's more of a Jack in the Box.
Jack in the Box is great.
I don't want to offend Jack in the Box fans out there. I think they're Burger King.
And I'll die on the hill. Biden's the best president of my lifetime. That's only since Clinton. Just in terms of legislative effectiveness and the economic recovery after COVID, you can't argue with it. He's a B president all day long.
Burgers actually taste better than Burger King, but
Burger King burgers are terrible.
Joe Biden. He is a marionette. He is just a sort of cloudy-minded marionette. The strings are being pulled broadly by the liberal establishment. So he, sadly, is just a Jack in the Box. If you agree with my...
No, I don't agree with any of the horse shit you said. Oh, God. I already had to deal with that twice today. Lord have mercy on my soul. Let me know what you thought about that, watching my head explode. Leave your comments down below for where you would rank these presidents, what you would want me to see, react to next, like and subscribe, and share around, please. And remember, never stop learning.